What if the God you were taught to worship was not one but two? What if the same Bible that speaks of infinite love also conceals a voice of blood, fire, and destruction? Open its earliest pages and you find Yahweh commanding wars, demanding slaughter, drowning the world in floods. Yet turn to the Gospels, and a different voice emerges, one that preaches forgiveness, mercy, the turning of the other cheek. How can such opposites live within one book? Is this the same God wearing two masks? Or are we looking at two entirely different beings stitched together into a single scripture? Imagine standing in a temple lit by fire, priests chanting as blood drips from sacrificial altars, the smell of smoke clinging to stone. Then picture another scene, a quiet hill, a teacher breaking bread, speaking of love and grace beneath an open sky. These are not minor shifts in mood. They are contradictions so vast, they split the heavens themselves. One God demands obedience through terror. Another offers liberation through sacrifice. One is a storm of wrath, the other a whisper of light. The forbidden truth is this: perhaps the Bible does not show us a single divine will, but a fracture, a rivalry, a hidden contest for the throne of creation. And if this is true, then every prayer, every ritual, every drop of blood shed in devotion may not go where you think it does. Every empire begins with architecture not just of stone, but of power, ritual, and story. The Bible itself is a cathedral, yet within its walls we find two conflicting blueprints. On one side, the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, who speaks in thunder and demands sacrifice, conquest, and obedience. On the other, the God revealed in the Gospels, embodied in Jesus, who calls for forgiveness, humility, and the breaking of oppressive chains. This is not merely evolution of theology, it is a split architecture, a double structure of rule, one built from fear, the other from love. In the Old Testament, Yahweh is portrayed as the architect of control. He writes laws in stone, demands ritual sacrifice, and unleashes plagues against those who resist. He orders Abraham to slit the throat of his son, commands Joshua to slaughter entire nations, and drowns the earth in a flood of judgment. His architecture is legalistic and violent, a fortress of commandments, borders, and punishments. He is builder and destroyer, legislator and executioner, enthroned upon the blood of enemies and the obedience of his chosen. In this design, God is not a universal father but a tribal warlord, demanding loyalty in exchange for survival. In the New Testament, the architecture shifts. Jesus preaches of turning the other cheek, forgiving 70 times 7, loving even one's enemies. He breaks bread and wine as symbols of shared life, not of slaughter. He heals instead of punishes, embraces instead of excludes. Yet this architecture is not free of blood, as the crucifixion becomes its cornerstone, a cosmic sacrifice in which God sheds his own blood, rather than demanding ours. Here the system is inverted, no longer a fortress of law, but a path of grace. Still, both structures are bound to blood, one demanding it from humanity, the other offering it for humanity. The contradiction is staggering. How can the same God both command genocide and embody love? How can he be both wrathful warlord and forgiving shepherd? The Gnostics saw in this fracture a revelation. Perhaps these were not the same being at all. They named Yahweh the Demiurge, a false god who bound humanity to a prison of matter through law and violence, while the true, hidden God of light sent Christ as emissary of liberation. In this reading, the architecture of Scripture itself is a battlefield. Two blueprints laid over one another, one of chains, one of keys. This duality is not abstract. It shaped empires. Under Yahweh's image, kings ruled with the sword, justified conquest, and demanded tribute. Under Christ's, priests spoke of mercy, charity, and eternal salvation. Both architectures were absorbed into the church, woven together into a single edifice, yet within its walls, the fracture remained. Judgment and love, war and peace, blood demanded and blood given. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE attempted to smooth this contradiction, declaring one God, one faith, one creed. But the texts themselves whispered rebellion, for their foundation stones carried two different blueprints. The architecture of evil is subtle. It thrives not in open destruction, but in confusion, convincing humanity that contradiction is unity, that tyranny and love flow from the same throne. When people fear, they obey. When they hope, they endure. Fear and hope, whip and bomb are woven together into a single architecture of control.
Oh.
This is why the Bible's two faces are not mistakes, but pillars. Wrath terrifies. Love pacifies, and together they bind humanity in a system both brutal and beautiful. The forbidden truth is that this architecture still stands. We see it in nations that declare war in the name of peace, in churches that preach love while demanding obedience, in leaders who wield both judgment and mercy as tools of rule. The double-faced God remains enthroned, not as contradiction to be solved, but as system to be endured. And until the fracture is recognized, humanity remains prisoner inside a temple built on two foundations. One of fire, one of light, both claiming the same throne. Symbols are not ornaments. They are weapons, contracts, sigils, carved into the architecture of faith. And the Bible is filled with them, two systems of imagery woven into one text, each pointing to a different God, a different order. To read Scripture without seeing its symbols is to wander blind inside a temple. To awaken is to realize that every sign is a lock or a key. The Tetragrammaton YHWH is the most fearsome of these symbols. 4 letters carved in stone, unspoken, forbidden. The name itself was treated as a sigil, too powerful for ordinary lips. Priests alone uttered it, and even then, rarely, in ritual spaces thick with incense and blood. To write the name was to bind presence. To speak, it was to summon fire. Here the symbol was not metaphor but technology, a glyph that anchored authority. God, a seal of a God whose power thrived on secrecy and terror. Contrast this with the cross, the central symbol of the New Testament. At first it was an execution stake, an emblem of shame and humiliation. But inverted, it became the ultimate key, a sign of sacrifice transformed into victory, death turned into life. For Yahweh's architecture, the sigil was power withheld, name hidden, fire contained. For Christ's, the sigil was humiliation inverted, blood given, love revealed. Two languages of symbols bound in the same book, teaching utterly opposite lessons. Other images deepen this fracture. The tree of knowledge in Genesis declared forbidden, guarded by angels with flaming swords, becomes the primal symbol of suppression. Knowledge itself is framed as transgression. Curiosity is rebellion. To eat is to sin. Yet Christ, centuries later, declares himself the vine, offers bread and wine as sacraments of enlightenment. Where one God makes the tree a prison, the other makes fruit into revelation. This is not unity. It is conflict written in image, a battle over whether knowledge enslaves or frees. Blood, too, carries dual sigils. In the Old Testament, altars ran with the blood of lambs, bulls, rams, a currency demanded by Yahweh's covenant. The red flow was a signature written in flesh, sacrifices stacked like scrolls in a library of death. In the New Testament, the Eucharist reconfigures the symbol. Bread becomes body, wine becomes blood. The covenant is no longer paid by slaughtered animals, but by the God-man himself. The same element, blood, becomes two different sigils. One demanded, one offered. Even architecture itself became symbolic. The Temple of Solomon, with its Holy of Holies, veiled and forbidden, was a labyrinth of exclusion. Few could enter, fewer could speak the name. In contrast, Christ proclaimed that the veil would be torn, that the temple would be replaced by flesh itself. The body as living temple, the community as sanctuary. Here again, the symbol divides. One system builds walls, another tears them down. And what of the serpent? In Genesis, it is the deceiver, cursed, crushed underfoot. Yet in other traditions, the Gnostics, the Aphidists, the serpent is liberator, urging humanity to awaken, to see beyond the Demiurge's cage. Even Christ evokes serpent imagery. Be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. The same figure is vilified in one symbolic grammar and honored in another. Which God does the serpent truly serve? The symbols disagree. The forbidden truth is this: the Bible's symbols are not harmonious, but adversarial. Each one bears two meanings, two languages layered like palimpsest. The Tetragrammaton and the cross, the tree and the vine, the altar and the table. The serpent as enemy and friend, these are not different metaphors of one truth, but competing sigils of two powers. One system uses symbols as locks, restricting access, binding humanity in secrecy. The other uses them as keys, breaking chains, unveiling hidden light. Modern life still moves by these symbols. Governments inscribe the tetragrammons, logic and law, and secrecy. Corporations use logos as modern sigils, commanding loyalty like ancient idols. The cross still hangs in churches, its inversion from death to life repeated weekly as ritual. Even the forbidden tree persists in science and technology. Each discovery framed as dangerous, each innovation questioned as blasphemy. We are still living under the battle of signs, still prisoners or prophets, depending on which grammar we read. The question is not whether symbols rule us. They do. The question is whose symbols we obey, the locks of the Demiurge or the keys of liberation. For every cross conceals a scaffold, every tree hides a sword, every name carries both command and rebellion. To awaken is to read the hidden language, to know which signs bind and which can set you free. Blood has always been the oldest currency, and in the Bible, split architecture, it becomes the thread that binds both gods, though in radically different ways. The Old Testament demands it, the New Testament offers it, but in both cases the altar is never dry. Blood is the signature of covenant, the language of power, the substance that seals law and love alike. And if one God requires it to sustain his throne, and another spills it to shatter his chains, then humanity is left wondering, are we saved, or are we simply paying the price again and again? In the Old Testament, blood flows constantly. Animals are sacrificed in their thousands. Lambs, bulls, rams, pigeons. Their throats slit, their entrails burned, their blood splashed on altars, priests, and tabernacle curtains. The covenant of Sinai was signed not with ink, but with blood. Moses sprinkled it over the people as a seal. This is the blood of the covenant the Lord has made with you. Here blood was not metaphoric, was the legal tender of a violent economy. To sin was to owe, and only blood could pay the debt. Even conquest was framed this way. Yahweh commanded entire cities to be slaughtered, their blood soaking the earth as a burnt offering to his wrath. The architecture was transactional life for obedience, blood for blessing. In the New Testament, the grammar changes, but the currency remains. The sacrifices of animals are declared obsolete, replaced by one sacrifice for all time, the blood of Christ. At the Last Supper, he takes wine and calls it his blood, the new covenant poured out for many. Where Yahweh demanded payment, Christ becomes payment. The altar is not abandoned, it is inverted, yet blood still flows. Now it is divine blood, elevated as precious beyond measure. The cross becomes a cosmic transaction, the wrath of God satisfied by the spilling of his own incarnate life. Grace replaces law, but the economy remains fueled by blood. This continuity unsettled the Gnostics. They asked, why must blood always be paid? Why is suffering the universal coin? To them, this revealed the Demiurge's shadow that the Old Testament's demands were the contracts of a false god. Feeding on sacrifice. Crucifixion, in their eyes, was not a continuation, but a rupture. It exposed the hunger of the Demiurge, then broke it by making the ultimate payment once, revealing that no further blood should ever be spilled. Yet the Church, built on both blueprints, carried both logics forward. Salvation by blood, but also control through blood. History confirms the system. The Crusades baptized conquest in blood. The Inquisition justified torture as purification, blood as holy witness. Martyrs were praised not only for their faith, but for the blood they shed, which was called the seed of the Church. Even the Eucharist wine, as blood is a weekly ritual where believers consume sacrifice again and again. Drinking not only remembrance, but perpetuation of the currency. Whether demanded or offered, blood remains central, keeping the machinery alive. And what of the inversion? One God says, I require the blood of your children, your animals, your enemies. Another says, I give you my own blood so that you need give no more. Both systems appear opposite, but the result is the same. Humanity kneels before the altar, blood at the center. The architecture does not change, it merely shifts who pays. In one covenant, humanity bleeds. In the other, divinity bleeds. But the altar still stands, and the economy still runs. Even now, echoes remain. Wars are sanctified with prayer, bloodshed declared holy sacrifice for freedom or faith. Nations demand the blood of soldiers as covenant, institutions demand suffering as proof of devotion. The logic persists. Only through pain, only through blood, can meaning be sealed. The forbidden truth is that we are still caught in the same economy. Whether called covenant, contract, or sacrifice, the system thrives because we continue to believe blood is sacred currency. But what if this is the greatest lie of all? What if the true God never required blood, never demanded sacrifice, never fed on suffering? What if the endless cycle of altars, from Sinai to Calvary to the wars of today, is the architecture of the Demiurge keeping humanity bound by the illusion that pain must be paid? Then the crucifixion was not appeasement, but exposure, the revelation that the system is rigged, and that the spilling of blood, divine or human, was never the true path. The forbidden truth is this: blood has always been the currency of control. In the Bible it appears as both demand and gift, wrath and grace. But in both faces of God, the altar remains. To awaken is to ask the forbidden question: why must blood be the price at all, and who truly profits every time it flows? Every system of power rests on contracts, and Scripture is no exception. The Bible is stitched together with covenants agreements written in law, sealed in ritual, enforced in blood. To read it with open eyes is to see a vast web of spiritual contracts binding humanity not only to God but to the institutions that claim to speak for Him. These are not metaphors of devotion. They are the legal documents of heaven and earth, drafted to keep humanity tethered to the throne. The first and most terrifying contract is the covenant at Sinai. After delivering Israel from Egypt, Yahweh calls His people to the mountain. Lightning flashes, smoke swirls, trumpets blast from unseen mouths. There He dictates His terms. Commandments etched in stone, laws to govern every breath. But this was not mere moral guidance. It was contract sealed in blood. Moses sprinkles the blood of sacrificed animals on the people, binding them bodily to Yahweh's law. This covenant is transactional. Obedience brings blessing, disobedience brings curse. It is a legal contract enforced not by ink but by fire and famine, victory and exile. Later comes the new covenant, offered by Christ. At the Last Supper, bread and wine become His body and blood, symbols of a new agreement. Where the old contract demanded humanity's blood, the new one substitutes His own. This is the new covenant in my blood poured out for you. The terms appear inverted. No more sacrifices, no more altars, only grace. Yet even here it is still contract of binding agreement requiring faith and obedience to the Son. The blood is different, but the structure remains. Humanity remains bound. The Church understood this well. At the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, bishops gathered under imperial gaze to decide which texts were inspired and which were forbidden. The result was another contract, the Nicene Creed, a statement of faith recited to this day. To speak, it was to sign with your mouth. To refuse was heresy, punishable by exile or death. Here the covenant extended beyond heaven into empire. Agreement was not optional. It was demanded under threat. The creed became a new pact, not with God alone, but with the Church as mediator, the emperor as enforcer. Other contracts multiplied. Baptism became a ritual of initiation, a vow to renounce Satan and submit to Christ. Marriage was declared sacrament, binding not only to people, but their souls under church authority. Confession became contract of surveillance, words binding the sinner to penance. Forgiveness granted only through ritual compliance. Excommunication was the tearing up of one's covenant, casting the soul into outer darkness. Every sacrament was contract, every ritual a legal clause. Even the Inquisition was a theater of contracts. Suspected heretics were interrogated until they confessed. Their confessions were signatures, even if extracted through torture. To confess was to agree, even if falsely and once bound. The only resolution was blood burning at the stake, a final payment sealing the violated contract. Here law and religion merged, showing the true face of the architecture, binding the soul not only with prayers but with fire. The Gnostics saw through this machinery. In their writings, The Demiurge is not the true God, but a cosmic lawyer, a tyrant who binds souls with contracts of law and ritual. His system thrives on bureaucracy, commandments, covenants, and creeds, all acting as clauses in a prison that masquerades as paradise. In this vision, Christ was not lawyer, but liberator, breaking contracts, declaring debts null, shattering the false agreements of the Demiurge. But the institutional church absorbed even this rebellion, rephrasing liberation into yet another creed, another vow, another binding. Modern life echoes the same pattern. Citizens pledge allegiance to flags. Soldiers swear oaths to serve and kill. Workers sign contracts binding decades of their lives to corporations. Digital terms of service are clicked without reading, binding billions to invisible agreements every day. So the form is changed, but the essence remains. Consent extracted, contracts enforced, obedience demanded. The system survives because humanity keeps signing, often without realizing what they are signing away. The forbidden truth is that Scripture's greatest power is contractual. Sinai, Calvary, Nicaea are moments of binding. The Old Testament bound through fear of curse, the New bound through promise of grace. The Church bound through ritual law. Its covenant declared freedom, yet each tethered humanity more tightly to an altar of obedience. And so the question lingers. If these are contracts, then who truly authored them? Were they written by the god of love or by the Demiurge, cloaking domination in divine language? To awaken is to realize that covenants are not eternal truths, but agreements made under duress, drafted in blood, enforced by fear. And contracts once named can be refused. Every empire of control depends on inversion, flipping the compass of morality until good and evil are indistinguishable. In the Bible, this inversion is not hidden on the margins. It lies at the very heart of the text, revealing the fracture between the two faces of God. One commands, "Thou shalt not kill," yet orders the annihilation of nations. One teaches, "Love your enemies," yet curses those who reject his covenant with fire and eternal torment. What kind of divinity is this? The inverted moral code is the forbidden truth of Scripture. The same God is portrayed as both merciful shepherd and blood-soaked warlord, binding humanity in confusion. In the Old Testament, Yahweh declares himself a jealous God, punishing children for the sins of their parents, demanding entire tribes be exterminated. To the chosen, he is deliverer. To the conquered, he is annihilator. The inversion is stark. Genocide becomes justice. Slaughter becomes holiness. Obedience becomes virtue, even when it requires atrocity. Sacred law is wielded not to protect life, but to sanctify its destruction. The command not to kill is contradicted by divine orders to kill in his name. Here, morality itself is turned inside out, weaponized as terror. In the New Testament, inversion wears subtler robes. Christ preaches unconditional love, forgiveness without limit. Yet the architecture of salvation is built on crucifixion, the brutal death of the innocent, as gateway to redemption. Love is offered, but through agony. Eternal bliss is promised, but only for those who submit. Eternal fire awaits the rest. Mercy is conditional, inverted into another contract. The shepherd carries lambs, but wolves wait for those who stray. Even grace becomes law, its gift entangled with threat. The church absorbed both moralities, weaving them into a seamless mask. Wars were declared holy, launched under banners of the Prince of Peace. Heretics were burned alive, their screams baptized as the song of truth. Torture chambers were named inquisitions of mercy, purifying souls with fire. Charity fed the poor, even as conquest enslaved them. This is the machinery of inversion, to call destruction salvation, to call captivity freedom, to call suffering redemption. The empire of faith did not deny contradiction, it thrived on it, binding billions in a morality that reversed itself depending on who held power. The Gnostics refused the mask. They saw Yahweh of the Old Testament as the Demiurge, a false god feeding on obedience through terror. They saw Christ as an emissary of the hidden light, exposing the prison. In their eyes, the inverted morality revealed the counterfeit. A God who demands love but enforces it with wrath is no true God at all. Yet their voices were silenced, their texts burned. Their morality inverted once more, rebellion reframed as heresy, illumination branded as darkness. This pattern has never ended. Modern systems still sanctify inversion. Wars are called peacekeeping. Surveillance is called safety. Exploitation is called prosperity. Leaders speak of freedom while enforcing obedience. The same double language echoes from pulpits to parliaments, a morality that splits itself in two faces, one benevolent, one tyrannical, yet claims to be one voice. The architecture of control requires this inversion, for without it, obedience would falter. The forbidden truth is that morality in Scripture was never stable. It was always weaponized. The same book blesses both compassion and conquest, both forgiveness and vengeance. This is not evolution of thought. It is deliberate contradiction, ensuring that every act, from massacre to mercy, can be justified as God's will. The inverted moral code is not error but system, keeps humanity kneeling, never certain whether they worship love or fear, salvation or damnation. And so the question emerges, if morality itself can be inverted in the name of God, then what anchor remains? Perhaps none unless we see through the mask. For once the inversion is named, its spell breaks. To call genocide atrocity, not holiness. To call torture cruelty, not mercy. To call suffering exploitation, not salvation. This act of naming restores compass, stripping away the mask of the Demiurge. The forbidden truth is this: the two faces of God reveal not unity, but fracture. Love and wrath are not two moods of one being, but rival moralities colliding in Scripture. To see this is not to lose faith, but to awaken to recognize that the true God of light never needed blood, never inverted morality, never bound freedom in chains. Only the counterfeit demands such things. Rituals are the hidden machinery of belief. They do not merely express faith, they sustain systems, turning myths into reality and obedience into muscle memory. In the Bible's split architecture, rituals serve both faces of God: blood-soaked ceremonies in the Old Testament and sanctified liturgies in the New. And when the church inherited both, ritual became the perfect engine of control, endlessly repeated until humanity no longer asked why. In the Old Testament, ritual was sacrifice. Animals slaughtered at dawn and dusk, their blood poured on altars, their smoke rising as food for the divine. Every harvest, every battle, every sin required ritual repayment in blood. These were not symbolic acts, they were contractual. Priests slit the throat, the blood was sprinkled, the covenant was renewed. The people learned through repetition that life itself was debt, that the only language God accepted was death. Ritual here was not comfort, but economy. Pay in blood or face wrath. In the New Testament, ritual shifts form, but not function. The cross itself becomes ritualized death, reenacted in every Eucharist. The bread broken, the wine poured, symbols of a body and blood offered, once yet consumed forever. Weekly, daily, endlessly, believers drink and eat sacrifice. The altar remains, but its surface is polished with grace. Ritual is no longer slaughter in the temple, but consumption in the church. Yet the message echoes: without ritual, there is no salvation. The early church multiplied these rituals. Baptism became a watery death and rebirth, binding the soul under a new covenant. Confession became courtroom, where words spoken to a priest rewrote the soul's contract. Marriage became sacrament, yoking bodies under church authority. Death itself became ritualized through funerals, prayers, indulgences to speed souls through purgatory. The bodies, every passage, birth, union, sin, death was captured, ritualized, bound to the system. No moment escaped. And when rebellion threatened, ritual became terror. The Inquisition turned execution into liturgy. Heretics paraded in procession, condemned in trial, burned as living offerings while priests recited prayers. Their screams were hymns, their ashes sacraments. The witch hunts were seasonal rites of purification, villages uniting in accusation, trial, and fire. Here ritual was weapon, repetition of spectacle binding whole communities to obedience, fear rehearsed until it became faith. But ritual is not confined to religion. Its grammar seeps into every system of control. Nations raise flags and sing anthems. collective chants echoing temple hymns, courtrooms open with oaths, judges as priests of law, sentences as sacraments of judgment, armies march in cadence, parades mimic processions, funerals of soldiers are state liturgies. Even modern life brims with secular sacraments. Pledges of allegiance, handshakes, sealing contracts, the daily scroll of headlines repeated like psalms. Ritual has not faded, it has only changed robes. The genius of ritual lies in its invisibility. Few see it as control, most experience it as tradition, comfort, identity. But every repeated act strengthens resonance, binding participants to the system. To kneel, to chant, to eat, to sign, to marchage. Gesture is contract enacted, oath renewed. The two faces of God do not speak with words alone, they speak through bodies, rehearsing obedience. The forbidden truth is that rituals sustain both gods at once. The sacrifices of Sinai and the sacraments of Calvary are two halves of the same machinery. Both demand repetition. Both sanctify blood. Both bind the human body into a choreography of submission. Even rebellion is ritualized. Reformations erupt, creeds rewritten. The structure remains. Ritual at the center, system intact. And so the question emerges, are we worshiping God, or are we worshiping ritual itself? Has the altar become the true God, fed endlessly by repetition, indifferent to whether the blood is of lambs or of Christ? The inversion is complete when ritual becomes reality, and reality becomes ritual. Humanity lives inside liturgy, a mass that never ends. The forbidden truth is this: rituals are everywhere. They haunt churches and courts, battlefields and bedrooms, screens and streets. We think we live freely, but our days are choreographed by contracts disguised as habits, by sacraments disguised as customs. The two faces of God endure not because they are believed, but because their rituals are still performed. Until the cycle is broken, the Mass continues, and humanity kneels at an altar it cannot see. To awaken is not to destroy Scripture, but to pierce through it. Awakening means seeing the fracture of the double architecture hidden beneath the same roof, the two faces of God staring from a single throne. For centuries, believers bowed without question, thinking wrath and love were one voice. But when the veil is torn, when the language of symbols is read with new eyes, the illusion collapses. What emerges is not unity, but conflict to rival systems, competing for the soul of humanity. The first recognition comes with naming the split. Yahweh of the Old Testament is not Christ of the Gospels. One commands conquest, the other preaches surrender. One demands the blood of enemies, the other pours out his own, for generations. The contradiction was excused. God's ways are higher than ours. But awakening means refusing this excuse. It means admitting what the Gnostics whispered. The wrathful God may not be God at all, but a demiurge, a counterfeit enthroned through fear. Naming the fracture is the first act of rebellion. The second recognition is unmasking ritual. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. Animal sacrifices, crucifixions, Eucharists, inquisitions, witch hunts, even modern oaths and pledges all are the same machinery, repeating contracts of obedience. Awakening is realizing that the system feeds on repetition, that it needs us to kneel, chant, bleed, or click. I agree, ritual is not holy, it is currency. Once recognized, the spell weakens. To break ritual is to starve the system. The third recognition is exposing inversion, to call genocide holy, to call torture merciful, to call obedience freedom. This is the Demiurge's trick. Awakening means flipping the compass back, naming atrocity as atrocity, cruelty as cruelty. The moment morality is restored, the system loses its greatest weapon: confusion. A prisoner who knows he is captive is halfway to escape. The fourth recognition is withdrawing consent. Contracts only bind if we sign them, whether with blood, fear, or silence. The Old Covenant demanded sacrifice, the New demanded faith, the Church demanded obedience. Each was a pact enforced by ritual. Awakening means refusing to sign, to see the terms, to reject them, to realize that no God of light needs contracts at all. The true divine requires no bargain, no threat, no blood. It only requires awakening itself. Finally comes reclaiming the sacred. The system thrives by corrupting symbols. The tree turned into prison, the serpent into enemy, the cross into execution. Awakening restores them. Tree becomes knowledge again, the serpent becomes wisdom, the cross becomes exposure of injustice, not sanctification of it. Sacredness is stolen and inverted by the Demiurge, but it can be reclaimed. Once restored, the two-faced God is revealed as mask, and behind the mask shines a light that was never wrathful, never jealous, never demanding blood. The forbidden truth is that awakening is apocalypse, not the end of the world, but the unveiling of it. The Greek word apocalypsis means to uncover. To awaken is to strip away centuries of confusion and see the system as it is. A prison built on contracts, rituals, and inverted morality, all disguised as divine will. Once the disguise falls, the prison doors stand open. The system survives only through belief. Without consent, it collapses. And yet, awakening is perilous. It strips comfort. To believe both faces are one, God is to live with contradiction, but also with certainty. Someone rules, someone commands. To awaken is to step into mystery, to admit that the true God may not dwell in the pages of Scripture at all, but in the silence behind it, in the light unbound by contracts and the wisdom hidden beneath the serpent's tongue. Awakening means exile from the temple, but exile may be freedom. The forbidden truth is this: you were never bound by wrath or saved by sacrifice. You were bound by ritual, by contracts written in blood and inverted morality. The true awakening is to see that both faces of God are masks, and that the throne they share is contested. And if the throne is empty, if the masks fall away, then humanity must ask, who has been ruling us all along? If Scripture hides two faces, then every prayer may serve a throne you never chose. The question remains, who truly reigns, the God of love or the Demiurge of chains? In the next descent, we unveil the hidden throne. Subscribe and continue the forbidden journey.